So I guess that's one of the big shifts that has occurred in my practice. So we'll take a quick look at those two paintings. So this is a very large painting, it's nearly 4 meters long, and obviously based on that image, reasonably faithfully reproduced, and this work became this painting, much more considered and respected. I knew that's what it would become. So when I first started making these works, and as you can see from the more abstract work that I had been making, I'd never made work like this before. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just threw myself in at the deep end, and so this work and this were the very first paintings that I made. They were quite ambitious, I think. Oil on canvas, and quite large, again, nearly 2 meters across. And having never made work like this before, I think, you know, I just got stuck into it and found a way to do it. I don't have very good technical skills. I'm not a virtuoso painter. The paintings are very flat. They're not very skilled. They're a little bit naive. The perspective is sometimes not very good. But there's something that I like about that. I don't want them to be too realistic. I would prefer them to be a little bit flat, something a little bit wonky about them, something not quite right. You notice in general, this is the only work that has a person in it. It was a very early piece. It's interesting that he has his back to the viewer, is cycling away, but every other work that I've since made is devoid of people. There are no people, which is not always an easy thing to do when you're somewhere like Kuala Lumpur. So it means that you have to chop things out, you have to start editing the image, and that's what I do. So this work is called Hey, and so some of the text on them, they could be literary references, say from a book, they could be allusions to song, they could be all sorts of things, but a recurring theme would be something like disappearance, or absence, or ghost, about things that aren't there. In this case, disappearance, I've omitted a figure that was in the street scene, a water bottle in the foreground. So sometimes the paintings are about what's not there as much as what is there.
How long does it take you to?
How long does it take? It depends. Depends how much time I've got. As I was saying, I work full time, so it's hard to gauge. Some are quicker than others. Here in Kuala Lumpur, I have 8 weeks to make an entire exhibition. So I'm sort of working 12-hour days in the studio, and hopefully I will get the work done. And maybe when we get to the work I'm making at the moment, you'll get a sense of how long it is taking. But it varies. Some works are quicker than others. So again, it's an absence. It's about what's not there, which would be a big kind of tourist boat, and this is in Prague. And yeah, again, it's a little bit about the things that aren't there as much as what you are seeing. But again, devoid of people. There are still hints of people, like boats, or sometimes washing on the line, or power cables. This is perhaps quite a good example. This work is called Crooked River. And I say it's called Crooked River, and it says Crooked River on it. In a floor talk once, somebody asked me, why do you write the title of your painting on the painting? And until they said that, I'd never thought of it like that. I thought I'd put the text on, and then that became the title, which is true. I could give it a different title, and try and be more clever and make some other reference, and it all just becomes a little bit convoluted, if you like. Or they could all be untitled, which is a pretty annoying thing, especially if you work in a gallery like I do. everything's untitled, you can't tell one thing from another. So I never thought of it as putting the title on there, but it is the title on there. So with Crooked River, a friend and I launched a kayak into Crooked River, and we made our way down the river on quite a moody day on the west coast of New Zealand. And we fished the river mouth, went fishing in a river mouth to a place called Lake Brunner, the biggest lake on the west coast of the South Island. And that's where I took this photograph. I didn't catch any fish, and I had to paddle all the way across the lake to a place called Ivy Bay, and there's wind and rain, and it was horrible. It took us about 4 hours to get home, and the one thing I got out of that whole trip was no fish, but I got a really good photo and a really good painting out of it. And so what you're actually looking at here is not Crooked River, this is Lake Brunner. So Crooked River is actually behind the viewer. So again, it's about the things that you're not seeing as much as the things that you are seeing. Your ghost, a ghost, something that's invisible or not there. And this is one of my favourite paintings that I've made. It's not very big. It's been purchased by a collector in the UK, so I think it's now gone offshore. But I really like this painting, and quite like some of the details that you get within a letter as well, just little snapshots. Sometimes the letters draw your attention to those things. Radar. Which this is this word, I guess, is a palindrome, which is the word that reads the same both ways, forwards and backwards. And an artist that I greatly admire is Ed Ruscha. He's an American artist. You may know his work. He's been around since the 60s. He's made a lot of pop art, and he's made a lot of work with text on it, and it would be very remiss of me, I'm not trying to rip off Ed Ruscha, but it would be very much wrong of me to say that he's not an influence. And his text that he puts on his paintings tends to be white, but it tends to be fully capitalised, and he uses a font that he calls kind of a Boy Scout text, which is kind of, if you took masking tape and kind of made words out of masking tape, that's what it would look like. And I very purposefully use Arial, very generic font, very much a font with not much character. I use only lowercase letters, so I try not to give any particular emphasis to a single word in a phrase, but just kind of let them sit on there, and maybe they can take on lots of different meanings. And as you have seen, I arrange the words in various ways. I do that on the computer, and you'll see some of what I'm doing in Kuala Lumpur soon. And yeah, the font is very deliberate, and I'm very much aware that it can start to look like advertising, or like I'm trying to sell something, so I have to try and mitigate that or make that not be the case, but sometimes it's more successful than others. But the palindrome is what Ed Ruscha does a lot of, and so that was a little bit of a nod to him, that particular work. It's a very good example, I think, and I told Isabel about this the other day, I believe. It's a very good example of a time when the text didn't work, because it doesn't always, and you spend a lot of time making a painting, and it's all looking good, and then there's the potential to ruin it by putting a word on top. Lots of people ask me, I like that painting, but I hate the words, or why did you do that? And in this example, I think I got it wrong, because it needs too much explanation. It doesn't speak for itself. So this is a view, quite an idyllic view, off the back of a felucca boat on the Nile River, which I took when I was in Egypt. And I painted the painting. I was trying to talk a little bit about the things that you can't see, as with the other works and the things I've talked about today. And one of the things that happens if you swim in the Nile, if you're from New Zealand like me, and you're a skinny white fella who's not used to being in Egypt, you can contract what's called bilharzia, which is a sort of parasite that can calcify your intestines. It's very easily treatable. You take a pill called praziquantel and that kills it, and that's that. But if I didn't tell you that, then it just seems like a very strange word on a painting and doesn't make any sense. So I think I learned a lot from that, and I've never shown this work in public as such, but I think it's a good example of trying to learn from mistakes, I guess. So, really like this painting. For some reason, I just really like it. Sunken Waltz is taken from a song by a band called Calexico, who are an American band. And this work, I think, is exactly the same size as this painting, but I think not very successful. The text is too big, it's quite chunky, and just doesn't work. Anyway, some more works that I've made. And one thing I've tried to do largely is avoid, in Christchurch being in the state that it's in with the earthquakes, it's actually quite rich pickings for me. Architecturally, it's really interesting, piles of rubble and half-demolished buildings, and I've generally tried to steer clear of making works, what we're sort of terming there now as earthquake art, which I'd rather be a bit more celebratory about with the work I'm making, and celebrate places and celebrate cultures and the things that are out there in the world to be seen. This is one work that I have made, which is based on a Christchurch scene. It's kind of the only one I've done. It's not a bad painting, but it's not really a route I want to go down, and it's quite difficult because it's really easy to take very interesting photos in Christchurch at the moment. And this is another one from my hometown, not far from my home, looking across the history, and the entire suburb across the other side there is red zone land now. It was built very close to history. All of the land kind of turned to mud in the earthquakes, what they call liquefaction, and all of the houses sunk and mud just came through the floors. Nobody lives there now, and it looks quite tranquil here, but it's actually a wee bit depressing. Some other works. This is getting more and more recent now. Not completed this earlier this year. This one also. This is again from a tramp to a place called Lake Christabel. And Wine Creek was the next valley over. So again, you're not actually looking at what it would seem. You're looking at there. This is another lake. Didn't catch any fish that night either. And these works, which are not on canvas, they are oil paintings, but not on canvas. You can start to see some of my working methods and the stencils I use for the text. Very large painting, but it's on very thin 4mm MDF panels, split into 3 panels, and it curves around 2 walls, so it curves around the corner. It's not intended to be sculptural as such, but it is an attempt to try and bring the architecture out into the physical space of the viewer. And so this is another one of those works completed just earlier this year, and again it curves around. I haven't shown them yet. I'd quite like to put them on opposite corners of the gallery space and let them talk to each other. The funny thing is they're really quite large paintings, but once you put them into the corner, it kind of shrinks them. And this is the last painting that I completed, literally about 2 days before I flew out to KL. I put the text on, which is always the last thing to happen.